everybody. Okay. Is this thing on? Not quite yet, is it? All right. All right, I'm back. I missed you all. You don't have to reciprocate, but yeah, what a strange thing life is. And yeah, it feels like hardly any time has passed. But here we are, a different configuration. So that feels, it's reminding me of that things are different. Yeah, so I know some of you, I see some new faces, and so welcome. And if you're new here, I taught here for 5 years, standing up here on this very stage and talking about things. And yeah, we sort of went all in to move to Georgia. My wife and I, we have kids, and that's where she's from. And we talked about it for like 20 years. Like maybe one day we'll end up in Georgia. And then all of a sudden this window opened. We said, let's do it. So felt absolutely right. And we lasted 1 year. And we're back. It's a long and, it's somewhat painful story. Just things not working out. Talk about imagination. There's a thing called imagination, and there's then the reality that we find ourselves in, and those things are in a kind of dance. And things did not unfold the way we imagined, and our desire to come back sort of grew. But we said, let's wait. We got to give it 1 year at least. And that's exactly what we did. About 1 year to the day, we moved back to Ada, and we loaded everything back up, including our horses, and got a little bit lucky and found a place. And so here we are. And it'll probably take me a few years to sort of come up with what was all that. So maybe you can have me back sometime, and I'll have more to say about it. So anyway, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a life update here. And I want to try to talk about what I'm going to call Ancient Imaginal Consciousness, which sounds super fancy. And I kind of half made it up, so it's not that fancy. And I'm kind of just dancing with some things this morning. I want to kind of try to move in close to some possibilities, and I'm not trying to be definitive. And I know it's in this larger series called Who Am I? And it's the I part that I'm interested in. And there's obviously a relationship between consciousness and our sense of I. You could even say consciousness is the awareness of being aware. And a question we're starting to ask now is that just confined to human beings? Is consciousness confined to human beings? And where does the human being end and the larger field of consciousness start? Or what's the relationship between these worlds? These are big questions that are a little bit above my pay grade here, and a little bit out of my field of expertise. And you could say, you're going to talk about consciousness this morning? Why don't you stay in your lane? and I'm always wondering, what is my lane? So I'm going to come back around. I'm going to try to describe what my lane is. It's a broad lane, but I'll try to come back around to it. But I want to say some things about consciousness. I've been listening to this podcast over the last year called Theories of Everything. And I'm not exaggerating when I say on a good day, I understand about 10% of the podcast. It's about quantum mechanics and philosophy and consciousness, and then every once in a while I feel like I'm getting something. But for some reason I like to listen to things that are like outside of my field of expertise and kind of push me. And one of the things I've noticed about this podcast in this larger conversation is that, this is just my opinion, we're in the midst of a second Copernican revolution. That's a sort of a feeling and a sense I have, meaning this. The Copernican revolution was the very slow realization among mostly the Western world, but eventually it spread around the globe, that we're not the center of the universe. And that's kind of disappointing. It's like, and that's why people had such a hard time sort of coming to terms. Wait a minute. I thought everything revolves around us. And suddenly we realize we're revolving around the sun, and then that turned into a larger solar system, and that solar system turned into, galaxies, and then galaxies upon galaxies, and it's like getting worse. this realization. And people are having a hard time catching up with this. I don't know if you know any flat earthers. I'm going to pick on them a tiny bit, but the impulse is actually quite natural, because when we're confronted with such a vastly new vision of what is this world, it's hard to catch up. It's like, no, it has to be the way I presently understand it, or it has to be the way my ancestors have always understood it, and it's difficult to catch up. Are you with me? And anyway, you don't know that the earth is really round. I mean, how do you know that personally? Like the last time you were in space, you're like, oh, I noticed, You just believe it, So it's kind of a strange conversation anyway. And consciousness, the conversation around consciousness, the philosophical conversation, the metaphysical conversation, the conversation that's happening in the world of physics, is the new Copernican revolution. It is 10 times as mind-blowing as the first go-around, that we're simply revolving around the sun. So we're at the beginning of it. It's going to take a long time to catch up. And so maybe I want to say a couple things about that. One of the things that's being conversed is that originally people thought about consciousness as a kind of neutral and random result of just biological and physical evolution. Like, how did human beings come to become conscious? How did they become aware that they're aware? Well, it's just kind of a neutral and natural accident of the universe. You probably believe something like that. Or maybe you have a more religious perspective, so you might have a slightly different take on that. But the point is that consciousness in that sense is confined to human beings. And we're the ones who are aware of awareness. We're the universe becoming conscious of itself. You ever heard this kind of thing? Okay? Well, particularly in the world of quantum mechanics and other things called panpsychism and all this kind of weird terminology that I only half 5% understand, this view of the universe is just completely falling apart. And I'll give you the short version. Most leading philosophers and scientists are saying something like this, that the universe, every element of the universe, shares in consciousness. That's one theory, one idea. And let me say it differently and more freaky. Everything in the universe has a form of consciousness. We say, well, not rocks. Well, now you're in the wrong spot already. It's an expression of the field of consciousness. There is a kind of consciousness at work. And more than that, the whole universe, as far as we can tell, seems to share in some mysterious way in awareness. There's some form of consciousness at work. And I'll make it even more freaky, which is the most compelling metaphor, because the only way to talk about this is in metaphors, is that the universe is something like a mind. You know what people used to call that? God. Okay? Now, this is a huge debate inside these kind of philosophical. I'm not going to go too much further into this, because then things will get even more strange. But the idea that something mind-like is at work in what we call reality is now much more of a philosophical and scientific conversation than a theological one. They're like suddenly crossing borders. And actually, maybe you could say it this way, the borders between these disciplines are all now very porous. You know the famous line I always like to say from Rilke, I live my life in widening circles that move out across the world. And we say, oh, yeah, that's me. Except when these borders start to get kind of porous. And we're like, wait a minute. I don't know if I like moving out quite this far. What is this world, So, okay, that was just I don't know what that was. Just a wondering about consciousness, and just want you to know things are changing. So I want to try to talk about what I call an ancient imaginal version of consciousness, or ancient imaginal consciousness itself, as best I can. I'm going to try to lower this thing. One of the things that happened to me in my 5 years of teaching here is that I can't see very well. So I got older, imagine that. Okay, let me see. Okay, for the time being, I want to now make things very simple. The way I'm going to use consciousness right now, human consciousness, is just awareness. Like, right now, be aware that you're aware. Go for it. Just try it. It's not that hard. You're aware that you're aware. I'm telling you to be aware that you're aware, and that makes you aware that you're aware. And you're also aware that you're thinking things that I'm not saying. You're aware of your internal awareness. You're thinking, is this guy full of crap? Or you're thinking, why am I even here? Or you're remembering something from last night or whatever. Okay? You're aware that there's a kind of awareness at work. And I want to say something amazing about the human expression of consciousness, which mysteriously shares in a larger field of consciousness, is the present theory. But how does human awareness present itself? Well, thinking. Thinking is actually great. I know thinking gets a bad rap in spiritual circles, like, oh, all in your head. But it's kind of a miracle, right? To have thoughts. And what is a thought? Is it a physical thing? Does it exist? Is it a chemical? Is it a synapse? You know, is it a hormone? Well, it can't be any of those things, but it also includes all those things. It has to, because you're a mind and body. But a thought is kind of amazing. Like right now, miraculously, you can have a thought that disagrees with everything that I'm saying. Like that's kind of a miracle. And that's only one tiny expression of what we call consciousness, awareness. We also have sensations. Right now, become aware that you're sitting, that you're on a chair, and it's this brown vinyl fake leather thing, and you're aware of that. You can be aware of that, and that's a sensation. That's not even a thought. Now, you can think that you're on the chair. That's interesting. But you can also, there's a kind of senses. And how many senses do you have? Well, at least 5, and maybe some more because they have different names. But just think about them, like the miracle of sight and of listening and the music that we heard and the fact that we could comprehend and be inspired by what Beth is saying. And we're seeing it and we're hearing it, and there's, you know, a sense of smell, and it's just the miracle of being a human being. And all of that is an expression of consciousness. We're aware to a certain degree, except with senses, we're only maybe like 1% aware of our entire sense perception. Maybe 1%. You know, one of the reasons why dating apps don't work. Now, you're going to say, "Oh, they did for me. We found each other." Okay, all right. I just mean it this from a biological point of view. Scent has a huge say in attraction. I'm sorry, you can't smell your phone. You can, but I'm sure it would smell weird. But it's like it's missing something there because the mystery of relationship and of interaction involves the mystery of the human body. So, okay. We have thinking, we have senses, we have intuition. I'm just going to name some. What is intuition? We have imagination. That I'm particularly interested in. Imagination, or the imaginal realm. We can imagine things. We can imagine the future. One of my friends at Animus says we should rename the human species as Homo imaginus, because it seems like our version of imagination is wildly unique. What does sapien mean? Knowledge, right? We're not that knowledgeable, let's be honest, but we can imagine. We can imagine. So Homo imaginus. We have thinking, feeling, sensing. We have imagination. We have I'll sound fancy now. We have the somatic field, which is sort of a combination of things. It's a body-oriented way of consciousness. These are all the miracle of being human. And of course, over the last few years here, I kept pushing on the importance of imagination as a mode of awareness or consciousness, as a muscle that we need to exercise. Remember when I said that when Einstein was asked, how did he come up with E equals mc squared, he said, I thought of it in my imagination, and then I did the math. Now, what is that? That's actually thinking imaginally. And you can do it. Anyone can do it. And it's such a critical, important muscle for the future. I don't know if you know this or not. I don't know if you've watched the news lately, but we have problems in the world, okay? We have problems in this country. We have problems in this town. Probably not Grand Haven. You know, Spring Hill has problems. Or not Spring Lake has problems. But not Grand Haven. It's perfect field of unity and oneness. But everything else. Okay, so, all right, yeah, we have problems. And we're going to need the imaginal muscle of the human experience to dream new worlds into existence. Wouldn't you agree? And we don't know how to exercise it very well because we're spoon-fed images all day long, through our phones, and we let other people decide what's important, and we let algorithms tell us what to get angry about, or what we like. Yeah, so this kind of thing. The other day, someone was telling me about some form of magnesium glyphosate. Is that a word? Glyphosate? Glycinate? Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I didn't pay attention in school, so. I had never heard this word before, and the next day it showed up as an ad on my phone. I'm like, dang it, they really are listening, So anyway, so our imagination is a bit stunted at the moment. By the way, I'm still working up. This is all introduction. I'm sorry. Okay, let's do a sensitive experiment. I'd like you to raise your hands. This is a bit sensitive, but how many of you have lost someone important in your life, like they've died? Okay. Me too. Now, how many, I don't want you to raise your hand, but I just want you to feel into these questions. How many of you have had the experience of feeling something of their presence still around? Okay? Or something like all of a sudden you have a memory, like you walk into a room and you have a memory, and it's almost as if their presence is somehow informing your own consciousness. Now, you wouldn't think that. This is for my own consciousness. It's just, you feel affected, as if they're still around. I remember a few months before my dad died, my therapist said something kind of creepy, and he's like, because I was working through my dad issues and things like this, and he was saying, it's possible and probably likely that you're still going to live as if he's alive once he's gone. It's like, oh, yeah, that's probably true. But that's also kind of interesting to me. Like, all of us have had the experience of feeling, in a way, the presence of someone that's gone before us, as if it's still active, it's still alive, it's still around, because it is. Not to get all funky about the space-time continuum, and I'm not saying they're not gone. My dad is gone. I stood there, threw dirt on his grave. But also in the weirder sense, I'm affected and infected by his mode of being. And how far back does that go? So I want to talk about ancient imaginal. I'm working my way to this phrase, ancient imaginal. And just one thing I want to say about it is that our present state, we're not born tabula rasa. We know that. We're informed by those around us and those who have gone before us. And it's as if they're still around in some way, that our consciousness, our awareness is shaped in some way. And by the way, we're about the only culture, modern culture, that doesn't really take a conversation with their ancestors seriously anymore. We're like, oh, that's kind of weird. That's what they used to do. If they wanted to do something, they would ask their ancestors. We're like, we're not too into that. Sounds kind of freaky. But just because we're blocked to it doesn't mean that it's not open and possible. And this is also embedded in religions. Like, if you take the Buddha, for example, people don't say the Buddha once lived. That it's much more mysterious than that. It's like Buddha is a living thing. And same on the mystical level with Christianity. It's not like, oh, Christ was that guy that walked around for a while and all we do is we just think about him way back then. There's a fundamental belief that it's still alive in some way, that Christ, awareness, consciousness, if you want to sound fancy, Christ himself, if you want to be even more strange about it, still is around. You say, I don't like that. But you're okay with that if it's like someone you lost recently. Do you feel how I'm just playing with something here? Not trying to be definitive. So ancient, having a kind of awareness that includes the past, I'm saying is important. And perhaps is part of the consciousness of the future. We need more inclusion of the ancient. And I'll tell you in more detail what I mean. Now let me read you something that was very disappointing to me. It's from Jung. Here we go. When I was working on the stone tablets, but I thought about not including that because you're like, what the heck is he talking about? I'm not even going to tell you. All right? When I was working on the stone tablets, I became aware of the fateful links between me and my ancestors. That's what I was just trying to say a moment ago. A fateful link between me and my ancestors. And he makes it worse. I feel very strongly that I am under the influence of things or questions which were left incomplete and unanswered by my parents and grandparents and more distant ancestors. Huh. You mean it's not all up to me? You mean I go to school and I decide what I'm into, and these are my gifts and my ideas, and I'm working through everything, and it's all about me and my ideas and my philosophy and my spirituality? He says, sorry, you've inherited some things. He's saying this is in his memoir. He's like, it just became clear to me I've inherited some problems. Now, here's another really annoying thing about Jung. This is about to get very personal. His dad was a pastor, his grandfather was a pastor, his uncles were a pastor. And I say, who does that sound like? Oh, wait. My dad was a pastor, my grandfather was a pastor. On my mother's side, everyone on that side is also a pastor, so now I've got a problem. All right? Why do I care about God, faith, religion, doubt, spirituality, the Bible? Well, because I've inherited certain things. When I read this about 2 years ago, I felt encouraged and disappointed at the same time. And I was like, dang it, this is going to be the thing I'm wrestling with the rest of my life. I thought I could get out of it. Like, what if I just left the church as a formal job? And I could just like wash my hands like Pilate and be like, I'm done. All right? Doesn't seem to work that way. Have you noticed? That's pretty much all I talk about. And I like the idea that I've just inherited problems. It's not like I'm going to solve them. I'm just one link in the chain. So for me to be more faithful to what I'm going to call an ancient imaginal consciousness, it means I have to be more faithful to this conversation. In my opinion, it's just mine to carry. You don't have to do it, but I'm going to do it. So I'm regularly like remembering things in the Hebrew Bible. Like you think, couldn't we get over that? It's like was written down like 3,000 years ago or 2,500 years ago, depending on scholarship. But okay, that's mine to carry, but there's a link. There's a link. There's a sort of lineage. And what from the wisdom tradition needs to be maintained or needs to be in present conversation? That's something that I care quite a bit about. And that's partly what I mean about ancient imaginal. And I don't just mean ancient like need to go back and do it the way they did it and we'll all dress up like Jesus and just eat kosher food and speak only in Hebrew. And that doesn't make any sense. Okay, you can't do it like that. But there's a link. There's a link between lineage, heritage, ancestry, and if I can be as broad as possible, the wisdom of our ancestors that is needed and necessary to imagine a more healthy future. Instead of we just start blank every day. I don't think it works that way. Our ancestors might know something, and they might have learned something that is critically important for how to live, for how to be. That can be imagined in a new way into the future. So I'm sort of wondering what the religion of the future is going to look like. And my suggestion is it might look like this weird combination of imagination and ancestry and the kind of dance between that. It's like two lovers in a way. It's kind of weird metaphor, but I think about it that way sometimes. Okay, that's just me. That's just my opinion. What do I know? Okay, now I'm going to be more concrete. Here's a line I got from John Vervaeke, Canadian philosopher. He says, we're in the middle of a meaning crisis. And I'm not going to tell you what he means by that. But as soon as I heard that, I thought, that sounds true. We're in the middle of a meaning crisis. And we almost need all hands on deck to wrestle with what is consciousness? What is this world? What are cultures? What are societies? What is warfare? Who's right? What does it mean to be a human being? All these really difficult and pressing issues are coming at us like a freight train, and there's a meaning crisis. And I'll tell you something very sad. I have a friend who's doing a research project in psychology. And I'm going to tell you something that's very dark. Well, first I'll say something kind of funny, and then I'll be dark about it. How many of you would agree? Don't even raise your hand. But if I said something like this, that white males are the most privileged people on the, well, let's just say in the country right now. Okay, Oh, people are showing their hands already. Oh, I'm in. Okay. I mean, no one would really run me out of the room for making such a claim. Now I'm going to say something dark. The highest rates of suicide are white males. So we have a meaning crisis. Something's going on here. Something's going on. Privilege doesn't necessarily mean meaning. Deep meaning. Okay, so that's partly what I mean by a meaning crisis. It's everywhere. Our world is not that healthy. Okay, so thanks for that, Kent. Yeah, have a nice day. Yeah. Okay, now I'm going to get practical and then I'm done. I know I'm already going too long, but that's okay. The result of not having me regularly is I build up ideas, All right, I read a book last year called Journey into Emptiness. It's a fantastic book. It's about three figures. It's about Dogen, the medieval Buddhist monk, and it's about Thomas Merton, the Cistercian monk, and it's about Carl Jung. You see why I read it. And it's talking about the journeying into emptiness, and I don't even want to go into the details. What I'm interested in is the epilogue. So right at the end, this is a real scholar who wrote this. He tries to say, what are some common patterns that are coming up out of their lives? And what would a healthy spirituality look like that is holding the hand of the past, learning from our ancestors, and imagining possibilities in the future? In other words, what's the future of spirituality look like? What do we stand to learn? Do we just have to make it up on the spot? What are some non-negotiables? And I like that particular phrase because we live in a world that's like, oh, we don't, everything we want negotiable. But what are some non-negotiables? Let's be more bold here. And he says there are four things. And they're not going to surprise you, but I'm going to just list them for you. The four things that we can carry from our own connection with the past, from our own ancestors, are as follows. We need a container. He says we need a container. We need a container in which to operate, in which to move. Containers are helpful in this sense, is that they have borders and boundaries. And what do borders and boundaries do at their best? They help us feel safe enough to move around. If I dropped you off by helicopter in the middle of the ocean and said, swim toward shore, you would have an absolute freak out. Correct? We can test it later if you want. Okay? Because there's no borders. Like there's nothing safe about that scenario. I mean, practically, but also like symbolically. So we need a container. Containers help us say, okay, here are the edges, and I can move around in them. And one of the problems with religion, of course, is that the container can be very rigid. And we all know that, and that's why we want to break religions and things like this. But in a more general sense, what containers are helpful? You can ask that as a community. What is the container here at C3? That's an interesting question. Okay, we can talk about it in the talk back. Okay, so container. We need a practice. Like all religious traditions say one thing. Growing up is difficult, and practice helps. You don't just magically grow up one day. And you don't magically become more mature. Believe it or not, you don't listen to a talk on a Sunday morning and then poof, you're mature. It's primarily practice. Meditation, prayer, contemplation, ritual, fasting. Those are the ones that have lasted for thousands of years, something like 40,000 years, and they still matter. So container, practice. And these all start to feel like they're all in conversation with each other. The third thing he says is you need a teacher. That's kind of one that we've sort of forgotten about. Because teachers, first of all, teach us about practices, but also teach us a way of embodying life. And you could think about, who are my teachers? Are they alive? Are they dead? And I mean concrete, not in a real general sense. Who really is a teacher that I trust, that has practices and has a life worth embodying? Almost every spiritual culture, I'm saying almost because I don't know them all, on the planet has followed the same model. You need a teacher. So you need a container, you need a practice, you need a teacher or teachers, and you need community. You need community. Look, that's what I most missed about moving to Georgia and about leaving my job here. It didn't feel like a job because after a while it just felt like a community. So you could say, oh, we've checked that one off of the list, so we can just worry about the other three. But it's still an important dimension. You can't go at this alone. That's actually one of the most isolating things about the spiritual but not religious camp. You know, and I've picked on it, and I've also resonated with it at the same time. You know, I'm that, I'm not that. You know, I can never decide. This opening thing, who am I? That's one of my problems. I don't know, all right? But anyway, the point is, the spiritual but not religious, like I can just take whatever I want from the buffet, and is this just a religion that I make up? And suddenly it just starts to feel very isolating. Community helps. When you agree, community helps. Why else are you here? All right. So, okay. So those are the four things I want you to think about. Ancient imaginal. Ancient imaginal. What can we learn from our ancestors? And if we think about what is religion going to look like in 150 years, I don't know. But these four elements seem like something worth hanging on to. Container. And I like containers that can withstand the test of time. Practice. No, I forgot the third one. Teacher. See, I don't want a teacher. It's like a Jungian slip there, trying to say, I can do it on my own. And community. Have I made sense? Okay. It's so good to be back. I hope to see you down the road. Thanks for listening. And yeah, appreciate it.